हेलो एंड वेलकम। मैं हूं अलीना फारूक शेख और आज हम स्पेशल एडिशन करने वाले हैं रिपोर्ट कार्ड की, जिसमें हमारे साथ एक अमरीकी सहाफ़ी मौजूद हैं और इनका बड़ा अबूर है फ़ॉरेन पॉलिसी के ऊपर, ख़ासकर किस तरह से मुख्तलिफ ममालिक के दरमियान में जो मामलात होते हैं, टेंशन्स होती हैं, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स होते हैं, वो अमरीका की पॉलिसी को इफ़ेक्ट करते हैं। ऑफ कोर्स उनकी वजह से अमरीका के ताल्लुकात उन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जोन और उनमें जो ममालिक हैं उनसे शेप अप होते हैं। सो सब कुछ जानते हैं। हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं लॉरा केली। शी इज़ अ फॉरेन पॉलिसी एक्सपर्ट। शी रिपोर्ट्स ऑन फॉरेन पॉलिसी फॉर द हिल and she specializes in conflict zones. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura. So since you've worked a lot in conflict zones, let's start with the biggest elephant in the room, that's Pakistan-India escalations. So how do you view the recent tensions between Pakistan and India, and where do you think US stands, and especially when we know that Donald Trump and his administration has keenly and specially taken credit for it?
Yes, well, the Trump administration did demonstrate that they took an active role. It followed Vice President J.D. Vance initially saying that the conflict was something that the U.S. should not be engaged in, that it had nothing to do really with the U.S. But we saw from the administration they quickly turned around on that and actually dispatched the Vice President to call the Indian Prime Minister and advocate for de-escalation. And that came using close ties. The Vice President had just been in India and during that terrorist attack. And then, of course, the Vice President's wife is the daughter of Indian immigrants. And we also saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio play an active role, and his engagement was bolstered by his dual title of National Security Advisor. But the Trump administration did not reveal much about what the conversations were like with Indian and Pakistani counterparts, but the high-level engagement on all sides signaled the White House was making this a priority.
So how do you think, is that going to be a priority in the coming days as well, or do you think that's becoming irrelevant as we go on?
Maybe behind the scenes, the administration is keeping a close eye on this, but it's not something that's actively talked about in Washington in the same way that a lot of other issues are top of mind, whether it's the Trump administration's negotiations with Iran over its nuclear deal, efforts to stop Russia's war in Ukraine, humanitarian crisis in Gaza and efforts to get a ceasefire there and the hostages released. And then, of course, domestic issues. Washington is consumed by the effort to pass Trump's one big, beautiful bill on Capitol Hill that's really running into some problems. And not to mention, the administration is also in the courts fighting for its ability to impose these tariffs on countries across the world.
So that's very interesting, because they've mentioned Pakistan and India conflict in that appeal as well, right?
Yes. So one of the arguments by the administration on why it should retain the power to impose these tariffs is because it's a national security imperative. So the Trump administration has made the argument that, well, President Trump has said this, that his threatening of steep tariffs or his offer of increased trade helped resolve this conflict between India and Pakistan, allowed for a ceasefire to take place. And so they use that argument in their court filings to show that trade is a national security issue that falls under the purview of the president, whereas the counter argument to that is that trade falls under Congress, and only Congress should have the authority to impose tariffs and things like this. So whether the administration really is viewing or using trade as a national security bargaining chip is not entirely clear, but they are making that argument.
Okay. Laura, do you think the recent clashes have redefined this Pakistan-states relationship in some way or the other?
It remains to be seen, but I think it is a really interesting signal that Pakistan came out and acknowledged the Trump administration's role in kind of de-escalating the crisis, where you've seen on the other side, India has downplayed or said that the U.S. really didn't play that big of a role.
You know, India has claimed that they have proofs for the Pahalgam attack and its perpetrators, but they haven't presented any proof. What do you think is the reason behind their reluctance or delay?
I really can't comment on India's government and India's internal affairs, but I will say that it is it is a issue on Capitol Hill. We had the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee put out a statement that she wants to see the perpetrators of the terrorist attack held accountable, and wants to see some of this information maybe come to light.
So, you know, the tariffs and trade diplomacy that Trump admin has been talking about, do you think that can serve as a long-term solution to ease tensions between Pakistan and India?
Again, it's hard to say. I would imagine that this level of tension and this level of conflict, of course, going over decades, generations, it's not something that is probably easily resolved by economic issues. We see that this is not really helping resolve Israel's war in Gaza, Israel's war against Hamas, and haven't really seen economic policy solve conflict to an extreme example yet. So I think it's probably not a bad thing to try, but I think also discussing historical grievances and finding different ways of atonement in different.
Okay.
Probably.
Okay. So, Laura, let me put it this way. You know, Trump has offered to mediate between the two nations. Do you think America can and is in the position to mediate and find a solution?
Well, I think the Trump administration has demonstrated that they were willing to put themselves in the middle of it, and they obviously see it as a priority. Whether they have the bandwidth to do it remains to be seen. They're involved in a lot of different negotiations, and those things have not come to fruition yet. But I mean, I guess it depends on how America is viewed on your side, on India's side, whether they are a respected broker. But it seemed that America had the most impact on achieving this ceasefire when other countries did not.
But how willing do you think the Trump admin is to broker this deal or to mediate between it? Is it a real option, or is it just a political narrative that Trump is you know, just putting out?
I think it is a good narrative for Trump to put forward. We've seen him already tout that as a success.
But do you think he's serious? Do you think it's a serious offer to mediate?
It's really hard to tell with the White House. We don't know until Trump speaks. And when Trump speaks, we take him seriously.
So we know that India has been really critical of Trump's involvement in the whole fiasco. And then, you know, there have been statements where they've actively criticized Trump and the U.S. government. How do you think the U.S. can, under Trump or otherwise, play a constructive role in resolving the conflict?
I think probably a lot of back channel diplomacy, quiet diplomacy, talking over the phone and not really revealing so much about what is said, so that each side can speak to their respective audiences about what they're taking away from those conversations and showing a victory on their side.
Okay. So, you know, India has reiterated that it's going to take they can go for a misadventure, take action again against Pakistan, right? How is the U.S. seeing it? Do you think it's very alarming for two nuclear states to collide again?
Definitely alarming. President Trump, this is kind of one of the issues that he likes to bring up about how much he hates war, how much he hates death and destruction. Nuclear conflict is something that he seems to, I mean, everybody doesn't want nuclear conflict. That's true, but he seems to emphasize it in a distinctive way of his own personality. And we saw that, you know, he engaged with North Korea because of their nuclear program. He's engaging with Iran because of its nuclear program. He mentioned that it was important to mediate the de-escalation of this conflict because they're two nuclear armed powers. So it is an issue, but where the administration wants to take this is an open question.
Do you think two nuclear nations having this sort of tension, and especially one of them, India being specific, pushing they want to take an action again is a concern for the world right now? And do you think that the situation has become dangerous and the world is noticing?
Well, I think everybody should be clear-eyed about the threat of nuclear weapons use, but we've also seen a lot of engagement from the world about advocating against that. And probably India has heard, when the U.S. spoke to China to warn Russia against the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, it would be probably detrimental to India's position on the world stage if they were to use nuclear weapons, or even maybe signal that they were using nuclear weapons.
Do you think these political narratives, but evident threats, are a point of concern on the Hill right now?
I think it's always in politicians' minds, and especially those who are focused on the region and keeping an eye on it, keeping tabs on it. But until there is a peak of the crisis, probably keeping it low level and not speaking out on it as much as they are other things that are top of mind.
So Laura, India keeps rejecting Trump's claim of mediation or a ceasefire deal, right? Why do you think that is? Why do you think India keeps rejecting it?
Yes, I can only speculate, but from covering politics and covering foreign policy through the lens of politics for a couple of years, I imagine it's really just a signal to the domestic audience of showing how India is in control and that it was their decision to agree to a ceasefire and that they weren't pressured or coaxed in any way. India has this tradition of strategic autonomy that doesn't necessarily want to show that it is cowing or so to another power. So I imagine it's
And is
really
Washington seeing it like that as well, or are they really concerned about it and it could be an off point between India and US relations?
I think Washington is probably understanding of what are the domestic political considerations. We have our own, and as long as it doesn't impact what they are actually doing in the relationship, then I'm sure they won't really say anything.
How do you see Pakistan and US relations in Trump's admin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably an opportunity for Pakistan to make some inroads. I think that there's not really a lot of ties between the U.S. and Pakistan at the moment, other than maybe some security ties, and those might be waning. So the Pakistani delegation coming this week, I think it will be really important for them to hear what they can offer Trump. A lot of is what countries can offer Trump. We saw that Oval Office meeting with the South African president, and he kind of joked, "I wish I had a plane to give you," and Trump said, "I would take it." So, it's really about, in this day and age, what can countries offer the U.S. that makes them an attractive partner.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today. That's from this special edition of the Report Card. We'll see you tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.